if at all possible. If your subjects are okay being recorded, make sure you record it, because that's the highest level of data capture you can get versus taking notes where you might not be able to keep up. And if you have a smartphone, most smartphones now, you can get really good recording apps for them that are free or pretty cheap. So that would be a good opportunity as well. If you have an iPhone or a Droid or something like that, you can get pretty good apps for that. But the digital recorders are pretty cheap, and as an AMS scholar, you put that in your budget. It costs you maybe like $30 or $40, and that's a cheap part of your budget that you put in for your AMS proposal as a digital recorder. Okay. Then you want to have a notebook too, to take some notes along the way, especially if they remember when that part of the interview where you say, can you tell me somebody else to talk to because you're doing a snowball sample? You gotta have your notebook there to write it down. I like these notebooks that have this kind of hard binding on them because it's easy if you have it kind of sitting on your lap. It's not like flopping all over the place. So a notebook like this that kind of has a hard binding that you can carry around with you and it protects it a little bit is good too. Yeah, everyone wants to see that. That's really important, isn't it? Okay. Finally, we can actually conduct interviews using more than just oral questions. One actually interesting, or a number of different interesting ways to elicit responses are by using photographs, putting some pictures in front of somebody, especially if language is a barrier in some way. Sometimes that can elicit some interesting responses. Using objects like a frisbee or whatever, something that's meaningful to somebody, put that in front of them instead of asking a question. Sometimes people might respond differently to an object than they would just a question about an object or anything. Procedures, institutions, anything like that. Like if I was talking to those doctors in Ghana, I would want to know about how they interact with patients. What are the procedures that they use? Okay? So those are all ways we can ask about things without maybe just putting it in a regular interview question. Observation, participant observation. This is the third of the three methods that we'll look at. This one's a little bit different. In this case, what we're doing is we're, again, kind of looking in real time and seeing kind of what's there and basically trying to see it as something that's not part of our everyday understanding. This is easier to do in other foreign locales because we're actually a stranger to that culture. And so it's easier for us to kind of step outside of our everyday assumptions than it would be, say, here at Colgate or in Hamilton, where we take a lot of things for granted. What we're trying to do with observation and participant observation is see the social processes firsthand around us, take note of them, and look for patterns in them. Okay? And so this is one where basically it's a little wackier in some ways. It's a little bit harder to explain because you kind of have to get some practice with it, and then you kind of get better and better at doing it. But really it's about seeing. It's about seeing the social world firsthand and seeing the patterns there and kind of figuring out what they mean. Especially participant observation, I think, is a really great way to learn about social life because you are kind of learning along the way, and the people who are part of that life world are teaching it to you as well. So if you can get involved with some type of work or activity or whatever, it's often a really great way to learn about that social world and that kind of walk of life. Key aspect of doing observational participant observational studies is field notes. You've got to make sure you have ways of taking notes in the field while things are going on. So if you're doing participant observation, some type of work, you might actually not be able to write along the way, but you want to have your notebook along so you can take some jottings now and then when you have a little bit of time to breathe, and you can sit down and maybe jot a few notes. Then later in the day, what you're going to do is take those notes and fill them out, flesh them out with more of the details that you couldn't get along the way. And you want to do that as soon as you can after the actual action that you're involved with, because otherwise you'll forget. Even if you just wait one day, you'd be amazed how much you can forget versus the stuff that you remember the same day. So what I recommend is having a notebook, taking with you, writing down some things during the day, and then in the evening if you're traveling with a laptop, use your laptop to take more complete notes, and that'll help you in the end anyway to have it all computerized that way in a digital format. Yeah. Things to observe. There's all kinds of things. Obviously, social life is complicated, but some things you can look for: interactions, greetings, descriptions, contrast, hierarchy, status, stories. Again, the narratives that people are telling are a really important part of qualitative data. How do people explain things? What are their theories about things? Their belief systems? And then all kinds of physical things. You can sketch maps. You can sketch layouts that are an important part of social interaction as well. Why is one guy standing, or two people are standing, and everyone else is sitting down? Questions like that we can ask about a particular situation that maybe tell us something about status or interaction of some sort. Data analysis. Now we're getting to the last phases. Collecting the data is not the end of the project. Oftentimes it takes as long to analyze and interpret the data as it does to collect it. So you have to budget time to process and interpret your data as well as collect it. Okay, so this last slide is really about this. It's an important step, and like I say, it's time consuming too. For quantitative data, you're usually doing statistical analysis. You might use an Excel spreadsheet, you might use a statistical package like SPSS if you're really doing kind of more in-depth statistics. I'm not sure that EMS projects typically do that kind of thing, but it's possible certainly if you did a really solid survey. The most basic type of analysis would be simple things like medians or means or standard deviations. With the bigger end, you can get into more complex statistics, but essentially, we're again going back to that relationship between X and Y, right? All that statistical analysis is basically to show when Y goes up, when X goes up, does Y go up? Or is there seem to be a statistical relationship, correlation between X and Y? That's what we're analyzing with that data. Qualitative analysis is a little fuzzier when we get to the analytical phase in some cases. It's sometimes harder for us to say exactly how to do it, but essentially we're still looking for those patterns. Embedded in there may be a little bit harder to see, but embedded in the qualitative data are variables too. And that's what we want to look for. We want to look for patterns in the data that point to certain trends. And that's what we do with coding. Codes are basically little bits of data that we can match up with variables or concepts, and we mark them in certain ways, really literally. Like, so for instance, if I did an interview and I transcribed it, and I went through and I was reading it, I might say, you know what? This doctor in Ghana is talking about traditional medicine in this way, saying that it was part of how he or she grew up. So maybe family background experiences are a code that I see in this interview, maybe it's another, so I'm going to take a green highlighter, and that code is going to be green from now on. Then I see another one is where they're talking about the cost of medicine. Sometimes maybe traditional medicine is cheaper than Western medicine. So cost keeps coming up again and again in these interviews. I'm going to take a yellow highlighter and make that yellow. So now if I go through all my interviews, all my notes, I've got green, I've got yellow, I've got pink, I've got blue. I can start to see the trends, right? And so I can actually make some sense of all this stuff by coding it that way. And that's how we do qualitative analysis. Last thing I'd say about analysis is back up your data. Back up your data any way you can, to the cloud, to USB drives, to your grandma, send her an email with your data attached to it, whatever you can do. The last thing I want to see is a maroon news story saying AMS scholar commits suicide because they lost data. We don't want to see that. Steve doesn't want to see that. Nobody wants to see that. So back up your data, please. Save it any way you can, because you don't want to go around the world and do this project and have this great experience and then your computer gets stolen, or an elephant steps on it, or something like that, whatever. Don't let that happen to you. Okay, I know this has been long, but we're actually at the end. Look at that, we made it. Questions, concepts, sampling, methods, analysis, results. That's when you write up your project at the end. You've got all your stuff collected, you've analyzed it, it's all marked up. Then you write your report that you're going to turn into the AMS program. And you'll be finished then. You'll have a really good, solid project that you'll feel good about. So final tips. One thing we didn't talk about is research ethics, but we always want to be careful to protect the confidentiality of our informants and our research subjects. So we don't want to use names or other identifying information with them. We want to be sensitive to cultural differences, political trouble, stuff like that. A lot of places that students travel to are situations where people don't have the same rights, and the laws maybe don't protect, especially the disadvantage as much as they might in the context of the U.S. or places with more developed legal systems. So we want to be careful about that kind of stuff. We want to be prepared for the unexpected. All of the projects that I've been working with these students on, when they come back, they always tell me, well, I didn't actually get to interview this group that I wanted to. I couldn't get there, or they weren't around, or there was some other barrier in the way. That almost always happens in my experience with AMS projects. I don't know, would you agree with that, Steve, that there's always unexpected stuff?
I'm not sure about AMS projects, but it seems like, especially with qualitative, there are things that you don't expect.
Your plans are going to change, and you're going to have to roll with it sometimes. And sometimes that'd be for bad, but sometimes it might be for good. It might open up new opportunities, stuff that you didn't think about, but when you get there, you realize, you know what, actually I should be studying this. And maybe you're going to actually shift and do some research on that. So, you know, you might take those into account. And you want to obviously think about how you're going to be traveling, you might be jet lagged, you might be tired, you might be in a foreign place with weird food and weird people, and you're going to be kind of freaked out. So you want to account for that as well, that you maybe not be able to do quite as much research as you think you will because of the limitations of just your physical body and the time you're going to have and so forth. Last thing, there's lots of good resources. Again, the library, there's lots of books. These are books that I use in my class on research methods. Anyone can take a look at them after class if you want. This is a basic kind of overview of research methods. This is one on taking field notes and observing. So it's a good one about kind of what to look for if you're doing an observational study. I've got some links of just some basic guides from different universities or research groups about the types of research that we talked about. I'm certainly willing to help anybody who has additional questions about a proposal that they're doing. My office hours this semester on Tuesday, Thursday mornings at 10 o'clock, but you can always email me and ask if there's another time to meet if you can't come during that time, or shoot me an email. It usually helps if you have kind of a targeted question. If you send me your proposal and say, hey, Henke, what do you think about this? I may not actually have the time to get back to you in a timely manner before your deadline is due, but if you say, I wasn't sure if my interview sampling strategy was right for this project, what do you think about that? That's something I can look at quicker and I can get back to you in a more targeted way. So that helps me to kind of narrow it down a little bit if you ask a question like that. Okay? Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.